about it. This is weird.
From the land of conjurers flying through the internet to your device like a UAP, hauntingly unexplained and downright weird, this is the Witching Hours, and we are ready to take off in the flash of an eye. Good evening to one and all, wherever and whenever you are listening to the program. I am Giant of the Frost, and joining me, as always, is the medium Jenny Lee. How are you doing, Jenny?
Well, it seems like I have funny tasting tea again tonight, but other than that, I'm good.
Funny
Good and
tasting
excited.
tea.
Like cucumber mint or something. Like,
I'm good to go with my standard issue coffee. So
okay, good.
we're hanging in there. We got some new stuff for just some little extras we got in there tonight. If you've noticed, with a little extra something to the intro there.
Didn't Frosty's voice get really deep?
Yeah, it did. I wish I had that voice. Unfortunately, I don't, but that's okay. So yeah, we worked with someone to get some commercials and stuff like that kind of done up to, I don't know, add a little pizzazz. Is that a good word?
Yes.
Pizzazz.
Yes.
So
or razzle dazzle.
Razzle dazzle. Okay. Razzle dazzle. Welcome in, everyone. I hope everyone is having an absolutely wonderful Thursday, and we're heading into a Memorial Day weekend. So hopefully everyone has maybe a little bit of extra time. I know quite a few will anyway. So off we go and running into the weekend. Are you ready to get into some news, Jenny?
Yes. What do we have this week?
Well, I'll tell you one thing we have AI taking over the world, because everything that I've done the last couple of days, I have AI pop-ups like through Google and through Twitch and through everything, like basically asking me if it just wants to do everything for me. It's like, is AI just going to run the show? If I just turn it over and let Google run the podcast? I guess, I don't know. All right. So the weird news, rare fish that lives in complete darkness washes ashore on Oregon beach.
Yes.
This was one of the we had put into our Discord over there in our news section.
Morning, right?
Yeah, a rare deep sea fish that lives in complete darkness washed ashore in Oregon for what's believed to be the first time ever, according to the Seaside Aquarium. Beachcombers found the anglerfish, also called a Pacific football fish, just south of Cannon Beach, the aquarium announced Saturday. The aquarium said that only 31 specimens have ever been recorded around the world in places like New Zealand, Japan, Russia, Hawaii, Ecuador, Chile, and California, but it believes that this is the first time a Pacific football fish has been reported along the Oregon coast. These fish live 2,000 to 3,300 feet deep in the ocean, and they use light that shines from a phosphorant bulb on their forehead to attract prey, according to the aquarium.
Yes, I have seen some video footage of those, in the deep.
Yeah, creatures from the deep.
Very strange that it just washed up.
Yeah, and I think you posted this story in there. Mushroom hunters stumble upon mysterious stone sculpture in the Thai forest.
Yes, that was one I found today. You're just raking up all these stories we found for you today.
Well, you guys put them in there, and then I don't have to do as much work.
That's true.
Earlier this month, 3 Thai villagers were searching for mushrooms in the Dong Ye Wildlife Sanctuary, and they found much more than fungi. Hidden in the lush jungle, the trio stumbled upon a sculpture of a woman carved into stone. Went mushroom hunting and found this. Pramul Kongtratak, one of the villagers who found the sculpture, and I apologize if I butchered that name, wrote on social media, according to the nation Thailand's Prem Natancha. I've lived there for so long, but just learned we have this around here. It's a blessing. They reported the sculpture of Thailand's Department of National Parks, Wildlife, and Plant Conservation, which sent officials to investigate. As the department writes in a translated Facebook post, the carving is located near the Cambodian border in the Buriram province's southernmost district. While officials initially announced that the piece might be ancient, its age is currently unknown. Depicted from the legs up.
It was old enough for none of the people that lived there forever to know that it existed, though.
Yeah.
Depicted from the legs up, the sculpted woman emerges from the slanted face, a boulder on the forest floor. She sports long hair and a traditional dress, including a full skirt and heavy neckwear. Her left arm appears to be holding a branch above her head.
As all that's interesting, Amber Morgan's report. Some think the sculpture dates back to the era of Varavati, a Southeast Asian kingdom that flourished between 6th and 11th centuries, and that it depicts Maya Devi, mother of Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Buddha.
The Buddha.
So we'll wait and see if there's any updates on that. It's always interesting when they find really old stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Just happenstance. They're just looking for mushrooms.
Well, I decided to put this story in here today because we've talked about the reporting leading up to it. 85% of a Neuralink implant's wires are already detached, says patient.
Oh, for crying out loud.
An estimated 85% of Neuralink's brain-computer interface, the BCI implant threads connected to the first human patient's motor cortex, are now completely detached, and his brain has shifted inside his skull up to 3 times what the company expected. Volunteer Noland Arball told the Wall Street Journal on Monday. Arball also stated Neuralink has since remedied the initial performance issues using an over-the-air software update and is performing better than before, but the latest details continue to highlight concerns surrounding the company's controversial, repeatedly delayed human implant project. Neuralink's coin-sized N1 BCI implants, 64 wires thinner than a human hair, are inserted a few millimeters into the motor cortex. Each thread contains 16 electrodes that translate a user's neural activity into computer commands like typing and cursor movement. Around 870 of the 1,024 electrodes in Arbaugh's implants are no longer functional. And it allegedly took Neuralink a few weeks to remedy. When Arbaugh asked if his implant could be removed, fixed, or even replaced, Neuralink's medical team relayed they would prefer to avoid another brain surgery and instead gather more information. So some initial success, but now some concerns there. And the last news story we have for tonight is another continuation of something that's been coming up on the news a lot. Plastic junk. Researchers
no, not the plastic. Always with the plastic.
Yeah, researchers find tiny particles in male testicles. Our bloodstream, brain, or lungs, microscopic fragments of plastic seem to turn up every time scientists scour a new corner of the human body.
What in the world?
In our recent news stories about the water.
How does it get in there?
Well, that's exactly what I was just talking about. We were talking the past news stories we've had are that it's in all the oceans, it's in all the lakes, it's in all the streams, and it's in private well water.
Kids just being born with plastic now.
Scientists have not been able to find a source, according to the news stories we've come across, that actually is free from nanoplastics. So the male reproductive organs are no exception. New research published this month finds microplastics can build up in the testicles of humans and dogs, raising more questions about the potential health impacts of these particles. Animal studies have shown exposure to microplastics can impact sperm quality and male fertility, but scientists are still in the early stages of translating this work to human health. Microplastics are everywhere, says Dr. John Yu, a toxicologist in the College of Nursing at the University of New Mexico, and lead author of the study. The quantification of these microplastics in humans is the first step to understanding its potential adverse effects. When we set out to do this study, Yu didn't expect microplastics would have penetrated the male reproductive system so extensively, given the tight blood tissue barrier around those organs.
Yeah.
To his surprise, the research team unearthed a wide range and heavy concentration of microplastics in the testicles of about 24 men and close to 50 dogs.
Wow.
The results may also be relevant to a well-documented global decline in sperm count and other problems related to male fertility. This trend has been linked to a host of environmental and lifestyle factors, including certain endocrine disrupting chemicals found in plastics. The growing numbers of studies like this one are compelling and should be a wake-up call for policymakers, says Tracy Woodruff, the director of the Environmental Research and Translation for Health Center at the University of California, San Francisco.
What a mess.
That's something that we just started kind of picking up on this show and talking about on the news, and now I guess it's worked its way into my algorithm. I'm getting a new story every week or two about
About
they're finding
microplastics.
microplastics in all the places they never thought that they could wind up. So,
Yikes.
yeah, that's what we have going on, and that was the weird news.
It was weird. That was weird.
Mike Clelland's 2015 book, The Messengers, was met with high praise. In it, he explores the mysterious connection between owls, synchronicities, and UFO abduction. It was his firsthand experiences with these elusive events that have been the foundation for his research. This book is also a personal memoir and a journey of self-discovery. Mike also hosted a series of podcasts, Hidden Experience and the Unseen, on Whitley Strieber's network. These platforms feature extended audio interviews with visionaries and experts examining the complexities of the overall UFO experience. Mike is also considered an expert in the skills of ultralight backpacking and is the author and illustrator of a series of instructional books on advanced outdoor techniques. After 25 years living in the Rockies, he now lives in the Pacific Northwest. Please welcome to the Witching Hours, Mike Clelland. How are you doing, Mike?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited.
Well, yeah, we're super excited to have you on, as I think many in our chat are as well. Well, we have, just to say it, we kind of have a propensity for owls over here anyway. We have lots of owl artwork always going around. We
Yes.
do a lot of stuff with not just the paranormal, but spirituality and stuff like that. And owls have always played a huge, I don't know, symbolic part with a lot of the imagery and stuff that we see in that field. So I guess we'll start off tonight, Mike, just kind of asking, how did you get interested in owls, and how did all this kind of stem up for you?
Good. That's so. I'm 61 now. When I was 44, this would have been back in 2006. I was living in a very beautiful part of the country. I was living right near Jackson Hole, Wyoming, or the Tetons. I was living in the Idaho side of the Tetons, in this beautiful spot. And at the time, I was working for an outdoor school, and I was spending a lot of time in Alaska. Is my audio coming through okay?
Yes.
It's breaking
coming
up
through
a little,
okay? Good.
tiny, little bit, but it's not
Okay.
distracting. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I can do at this end because you were breaking up too. But I was living in this beautiful town, and I had been working for an outdoor school. And there was a young woman. Her name is Kristen, and I met her in this town. Now, I've been up in Alaska all summer, and I came down to the lower 48 in. This would have been September or October, so it would have been early autumn, and I took her camping for one night. She hadn't camped at all in the mountains there, and I was like, "I'll take you camping," and it was really, it was a little bit of a first date, and we're still friends. I just talked to her the other day, and so we went to the mountains with very light backpacks, and I was sitting on a flat rock as the sun was setting, making dinner on a camp stove. Now, I was completely in my element. I'd been outdoors all summer long, and she was talking, and there's a couple points to tell the story correctly. I have to include these details. She was talking about something, and I took note, and I said, "This is a smart person. I'm impressed with what she's saying." And at that moment, an owl flew over us, and then a second owl, and then a third owl. And for the next couple of hours, these owls flew around us. They landed near us. They landed on branches near us. And it was really remarkable. So when we actually found to sleep some hours later, these owls were still flying around, and we were lying on our backs, looking straight up at the stars. This is the Northern Rockies. It was spectacular. The stars are unbelievable. So we did not take a tent when we went camping. We knew the weather. I could check the weather. There was not going to be rain. Totally beautiful, clear sky. So we just slept out under the stars. And these owls would, as we were lying on our backs up at these owls would fly right above our faces.
Wow.
It was so magical. And now owls are very silent in flight. So it was felt like the stars were blotted out for just a half a second, quarter of just an instant. And so after that night, the next morning we hiked out, and to tell the story properly, there's so many odd little synchronistic details. But we hiked out, and I said, that was fun. Let's do this again sometime. And she said, great. And so 4 days later, I said, let's go out for a night, just like we did, just one night. And this time it was a little cold, so we did shelter. We had a tent with us. And I said, the sun was setting. I said, let's climb that hill. Short little hill. We were above tree line in the peaks, the big peak area. So there was no trees around. Oh, some scrubby small trees, but we were not in a forest. And so we hiked up to the top of this hill. We watched the sunset. And so as the sun was setting, 3 owls flew around us again. I'm convinced they were the same 3 owls. There's no way I can prove that. But and these were what's called short-eared owls, and they're about 10 inches tall. They're cute, and they real owls and doing little owl things. And but before they kind of kept their distance, but this time they were right up close. And I can so clearly see the look on her face, on Kristen's face. This one owl landed right at our feet, and she was just astonished. And I could just see the awe and the reverence in her eyes at this moment. And as this was happening both nights, 3 days earlier and this night, I had a voice in my head. Now, this is a little bit hard to, I did not talk about this at the time, but I'm talking about it. I talk about it all the time now. But I kept it as I was in a diary entry just shortly after it happened. But I heard a voice in my head. I was looking at real owls. I heard a voice in my head, and it said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And afterwards, right, so to have it happen once was kind of cool, but have it happen twice with the same person, 4 days apart. This was in a completely different part of the mountains. We're miles away from where we were the first time. And to have it happen twice was positively mystical. And both of us were really kind of knocked off balance. And we did a lot of research together and independently, and we'd share what we found. This was actually kind of early on in the days of, doing internet searches, 2006. But there were plenty of sites where you could look up, like, what's owl symbology? What's the mythology? What's the totem animal? What's the spirit message? And both of us got a little obsessed. Now, leading up to this, let me back up a little bit. 3 years later, I'll do this part first. Leading up to this, I had been reading a lot of literature, UFO books. And I had a handful of experiences in my youth and as a young adult where, like, wow, I had a handful of events that sure sound like UFO contact, like what we would call abduction events. And I did not want to deal with it. I didn't, no way, it was not special. Nothing happened to me. I'm not going there. I was completely pushing this stuff away. I was pushing it away, fully pushing it away. And in doing so, I at the same time I was reading this literature, and there would be parts of the story. I was like, well, that sounds like what happened to me. So that point in 2006 was, like you put like a pot of boiling water on the stove, and just before it boils, there's this little sort of tension, like the lid kind of goes tick, 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 tick. That's my life felt like that. It was like there was going to be a day I was going to need to look into this. And so after the event, right? So I had a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with UFOs. I started looking into the owl mystery, and I started looking into my own experiences simultaneously. So they were kind of co-joined. And I'll add, I was also having a lot of synchronicities. Like after this event, I had a lot of synchronicities that had to do with UFOs or owls.
I think that most of our viewers understand what a synchronicity is. But for anyone who might be listening to this who doesn't know what a synchronicity is, will you give us your definition of it?
Well, Carl Jung coined the term synchronicity. Let's jump way back to ancient Greece. Plato. No, excuse me. Forgive me. I'm blending the term archetype. Let's jump right to Carl Jung, about 100 years ago, coined the term synchronicity to define these powerful coincidences. The shortest definition would be a meaningful coincidence. like that has an emotional power, and then to the person receiving the synchronicity, or at the receiving end of the synchronicity, if it has an emotional charge, I would say that would be a synchronicity. Now, what the mechanism of this is, I have no idea. So I don't try to analyze. I don't try to I don't look for an answer to, like, what's happening. How does this happen? I'm just looking at the stories. Let's say that's because this is so. The cover of my first book is Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. So those three things, they're mysteries. They're magical in many ways. All three of them, and are so. Where was I? Synchronicity, Kristen. Oh, so I was having all kinds of synchronicities, and I started a blog. And I put that story that you just heard, camping with Kristen. I did. I'm pretty sure I did not mention the UFOs in the first blog post.
Yeah.
In the story, but it was a magical, beautiful kind of sparkly event in my life, and I put it as the diary entry in there with the one few sentences snipped out. And afterwards, I called Kristen up because I wrote in the thing right there. I said, we were talking about something really interesting right at the point the first owls showed up. Like, I recognized there was something smart about her, something spiritual about her. And I called her up and I asked her, what were we talking about the very first night the very first owl showed up? And she said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. She said, I was giving my most heartfelt definition of what God means to me.
Oh my goodness.
So now I'm not at all churchy. Like, I'll take a step back and say, I'm not like devout in any way that would ring a bell for me in that sense, but it did ring a bell in the sense that, wow, that is a highly charged mythic element to the story. So that takes this kind of, the story took on a more mystical charge because of that one thing that she shared with me. I do remember we were talking about spiritual things, but I didn't realize like the depth, and like she went right to the zenith of what would be, the spiritual pyramid there. Now, I put that on a blog. And then I wrote a little essay, like, oh, then, I contacted Kristen. She talked about talking about God, and she had a beautiful little thing. And I just put some of we went back and forth with some email exchanges, and I shared some of that. And it was in this blog, little by little, I started sharing owl stories, and all of a sudden I started having more owl experiences. And then that generated seemingly more. And people started sending me their owl stories. And then I put on my blog, like, I want to hear your owl stories. And it didn't take long. And I was flooded with these stories. So that was 18 years ago. And I think I got the math right. Getting close, 17, 18 years ago. I can't do math in front of people. But
yeah, 18 years ago sounds right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have been collecting, archiving, cataloging, trying to analyze these stories. I've been putting them in books, some of them, not all of them. I've got so many I can't keep up. I got like 4 today. Wow. That's not a lot. Like good ones.
They just keep coming.
And I'm asking for them. I want them.
Yeah.
And so consequently, I'm known as the owl guy. Like, if anyone anywhere in the world has an experience with a UFO and an owl, we didn't even get to the UFO stuff yet, but that's a theme.
We'll get
where
there.
You start pulling on that thread. So if anyone in the world has an experience with a UFO and an owl, co-joined, I am like, and they Google it. Like, they don't have to know who I am. They Google it. I'm going to be the first thing that comes up in about the next 25 things below that. And so I'm easy to find. Right at the top of my site says, I want to hear your owl story. They send them to me. So
that's what I said. That's what I said to Frosty when we were trying to see who are we going to book for the summer, or we need to book some more people. I said, we need the owl guy. So do you get these stories from all over the world?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I only speak English, so I'm certain there's a little bit of filtering that takes place and so on. And, Borneo can't quite, send me their story. They could. I'd have to translate it somehow. But anyway, so the majority are English speaking, and but it's been remarkable. Just mind-blowing. But yes, from all over the world.
What year did you say that your original experience took place in, roughly?
The original owl experience?
Yeah, the one where you were out in the woods with your friend?
With Chris, 2006.
2006. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting because the first time I ever heard of a connection with this phenomena, and I could have heard about it before, and it just never took root with me. But there was a Hollywood film made, I don't know, I guess around 2014. It was like a found footage UFO film called.
Yep.
Okay. The Fourth Kind, I think is what it was called.
And that 2009. It came out in 2009.
Oh, 2009. Okay. And I remembered that movie had a lot of symbolism between the UFO contact and owls. And it made me kind of do a deep dive on, was that a real connection or was it just for Hollywood? And that's when I found out, yes, there is a connection there. So what did you think about that? You're the owl guy. Did they have anything to do with you for that? Or someone had read your book or what was going on with that?
The book hadn't been out yet. So
okay.
It was going to be, and it would be another 6 years before the book came out. What I can say is that in Whitley's, so I didn't invent the owl connection. Like people had been documenting that. And so it existed out there, most particularly in the first point in a nonfiction book was in Whitley Strieber's 1987 book, Communion. On page 27, I've footnoted it so many times. He tells a story of he had what we would now call a UFO contact experience, or what might be called an abduction experience, on the night of Christmas Day. So on the night of the 25th of December, 1985, he had an experience. It took him a year to write the book. It came out in 1987. And of that night, he woke his wife up and said, I think I saw an owl. No, he didn't say, he said, I saw an owl on the windowsill last night. He woke up from an abduction event. He turns to his wife and said, I saw an owl on the windowsill. He didn't tell her about the contact experience. He didn't tell me, he had like the onboard craft type things, even though he describes it as it doesn't sound like he was like on board a flying saucer. He describes it as almost like a tent. But what he told his wife the morning said there was an owl on the windowsill last night looking in our room. And so they went to the windowsill, and it was wintertime in upstate New York, Christmas time, and there was snow, freshly fallen snow. And if the owl had been on that windowsill, but it had not snowed that night. So if there had been an owl on the windowsill, it would have left tracks. There was no markings in the snow. So that told him something. Like he wrote it very poetically. Like he stepped away from the door, the window, and felt like this terrible sense of, like, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but he basically the bottom of his world had dropped out when he realized there was no owl on that. So, and other researchers had found it in their, or written about it in their books, and people who've had the firsthand experience had written about it in their books. And so I looked for all those accounts. Like I really scrubbed the UFO literature as best I could. And then what's interesting, you do this stuff on the internet and you have a blog and people are following you. People then contact you and say, oh, here's a reference. Oh, here's a reference. And so I was it was really remarkable. This is new in the history of this kind of research, where like before the internet, like, those same things could be done, but they would have to be done through a written letter, and it would have to be delivered to your mailbox. And so this was an instantaneous form of communication. Now, so in any one of those, you might get a that's this thick, and then there might be a paragraph or two sentences about owls. And Whitley Strieber probably wrote a page or two on owls in Communion. And then he did a couple follow-up books, and there was a couple pages here and there. So when you put it all together up until like his first 3 or 4 books, there's probably like, it's not much, 4 or 5 pages, maybe less than that on the owl stuff, probably 3 pages collectively through these multiple books that he was writing kind of. Now, what happened with me is I'm one that went kind of wiggy and got all obsessed and wrote 3 big fat books, fatter than they should be. So if you stack my books like one on top of each other, the nonfiction books, it's about 1,000 pages exactly, almost the page, 1,000 pages exactly on UFOs and owls.
And owls. That's amazing. So how does because you're talking about, you have this experience with Kristen and the woods with the owls, And it sparks this connection to your own experiences with UFOs. So tell us a bit about going down that rabbit hole for yourself and connecting all of that together.
Well, I had a missing time event, so I'm not sure if how up to you. Just butt right in. Sometimes I can get on a roll, and I can be a force to be reckoned with if I start talking. So you're not going to hurt my feelings if you tell me to whoa, slow down. So when I was 12 years old, I had an experience where I was walking home from a high school football game, and I told my parents I would be home at 9:30. And with the football field where the high school was in my neighborhood, it was just like Michigan in the fall in the 1970s. I was 12 years old in 1974, idyllic kind of Leave It to Beaver neighborhood. And the high school was not that far away. So you could stand in the driveway and hear the football game from the driveway. So I was with a friend. I walked home and I wanted to be home to see a television show. And I got to a point in the neighborhood. I know exactly where that point is. I could go right there and put an X in the sidewalk and chalk, and I know to the inch where I was standing, it feels like. And there was a bright orange flash in the sky. It was a calm autumn evening, and it just like the sky went from normal nighttime sky to just like whoosh, orange, whoosh, back to nighttime sky. So for 1 second, it was totally orange. It was incredibly jarring, and both me and my friend went, "Look, what just happened? What just happened?" And we talked about, could that have been an explosion? Could that have been lightning? Could it have been could a telephone pole like blown up or something? And nothing made any sense. It was totally silent. So I get to my house, and my friend Mike, that was his name, he walks a little farther. He lived a little deeper in the neighborhood, so he had a few more blocks to go. And I walked into my front. I opened the front door, and my parents were standing there, like, "Why are you out so late?" I'm like, whoa. Like, what do you like? I told you I'd be home at 9:30. And they pointed at the clock, and it was 11:30.
Oh my goodness.
And so there was 2 hours of missing time. I mean, the football field was not far away. It's funny. I told this story to my sister the other day. It was funny. I'll back a little bit. I told this story to my sister's book club because they read one of my books, which was like kind of remarkable. My book's pretty weird. So like it was kind of a stretch for my sister's book club. But my sister heard this story, and my sister said, she was a cheerleader in the high school. She was a little older than me. She said, "I would have been the pom-pom girl at that football game that night." So she's peripherally involved in this story. So I walk in the house. My parents are angry at me. I'm 2 hours of missing time. The next Monday morning, I see my friend Mike, and we're at the cafeteria. I remember this very clearly. Can I swear on this show?
Yeah.
Okay. Just had to ask. So sometimes I can't. Sometimes people say no.
Sometimes you can't. You can.
Okay,
hear.
so I'm sitting at the high school or the junior high school cafeteria with my friend Mike, and my other friends are there, and he says, I say, "Yeah, something weird happened Friday night," and he said, "Yeah, we saw a UFO with fucking lights and everything." And I was like, "I never saw a UFO. I saw the sky turn orange. What are you? I didn't. I was like, what?" And I was like, "Shit!" Like. I didn't say anything about this for a long time.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I was like, he's lying. Keep that up. Now I don't. Now I'm thinking. So since then, I've immersed myself into the research. I'm doing UFO research myself. It's very, very common for two people to have two different memories.
So you never talked to your friend about it again after that?
I talked to him recently.
Good.
And I asked him. I told him the whole story. And he was like, "I don't remember anything like that. I don't remember anything."
Oh, and now he doesn't remember it at all.
He doesn't remember all this. I'm 60 now, so it's been 50 years almost. Yeah, so that's a long time. And but he did say, "You know what I do remember? I remember your parents were angry at you for coming home late." So that's a funny validation. That's not complete, but at the same time, given the research, two people having one person forgetting, one person, like, that's so common in this lore that I can't overly judge why our memories don't match.
Did he ever say if he was home 2 hours late?
No. I asked him, and he said he had no memory. You know, it's like, it's like asking someone like, "Oh, remember that night 50 years ago?" And
well, for you, it was a profound thing, and I guess for him,
it was a profound thing, yeah. And I So, and then a few other experiences that were sort of like that. And then when I was 30, I was living in Maine, and I was living alone, and I was in this little cabin, this little house. It wasn't really a cabin, this little house. And I sat up in bed, and there was a bright light pouring through the window. And I looked outside, and there was this bright, bright light, and there were these 5 beings walking towards the house. They were close. It wasn't like they were way off in the distance. They were like pretty close to the house. And they were walking towards the house, and it was like skinny beings with the big bald heads and the big black eyes, the quintessential gray aliens that are like on every snowboarder's bumper sticker kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I looked at this, and I remember my direction, my focus was almost on the thing behind him, bright light. Like, what is that bright light? And it would have been great if it was a big flying saucer thing, but it wasn't. It felt like it was something small, like the size of a washing machine, but it was just had this white hot light that was pouring into the room, and that's what woke me up. Somebody once said, "How often do you get woken up by a bright light?" I'm like, well, not really ever, I guess. But so I kind of looked at these beings. I was the only one at the house, right? So there was no houses nearby. So like there was like they were coming for me. I mean, there was no other house, no one else in the house, and I should have jumped up and locked the doors and grabbed a baseball bat and got a kitchen knife and defended myself. But I heard this voice in my head that said, "Oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down." And that's exactly what it is. Put my head on the pillow, poof, I was out like that. And the next morning I was just like, that was a dream. Didn't feel like a dream.
Yeah.
But I just dismissed it as a dream, and I never even bothered to go out and look and see if there were footprints in the snow.
Wow.
And there's a bunch of things connected with that story that kind of became emotionally charged later as I started to look into my own stuff. So that after the thing with Kristen in the mountains was in 2006, and this event I would have been 30. That would have been 1993. So that's 13 years later. I think that's right. 13 years later that I had the experience with Kristen.
So do you have any more memories of what happened during those events now?
Of those events, no. I mean, a little. I went through hypnotic regression at one point, looked into the event in the house in Maine, and very little came up.
Okay.
You know what came up? This is a weird thing, and I've talked about this to some researchers and some people. What came up, I basically told the story just as I told you. The story kind of emerged under the hypnosis is weird. It's like, have you either gone through hypnosis ever?
No, but I kind of put myself into altered states as a medium, so I kind of understand it a little bit from that perspective.
Okay. It's very minimal. There's it's like almost there's nothing to feel really, but the hypnotherapist will ask questions and you'll just give these answers, and sometimes the stuff that comes out of your mouth really surprises you. So I guess you probably know exactly what that feels like sometimes. So but what it felt like under hypnosis was that these 5 beings were back. Like they were very familiar. It was like, oh, this again. Like, oh, they're back. Like they're here again. And it wasn't like, it felt like not just a little bit familiar. It felt like very familiar. And I'm going to try to explain something. You asked, so I'm going to try to explain this. Do you know when you, I have a computer, and if someone else wants to use my computer, there's a way to just turn off everything in all my files are like in its own, I can't remember what it's called. Like I have my own way to log in. I can log out. Someone else can come into my computer and they can put in their own password. It's the same computer, but it's a completely different, everything's different. The passwords, the desktop, everything is different. It felt like I was that alternate computer. I was still me. I was still the same hardware, but I was running on a completely different operating system than I would have been in normal waking consciousness. That's kind of an elusive way to try to describe something, but that's the best I can do.
Mm-hmm.
No, I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
can see
pretty
that.
descriptive, though. Yeah, I think that helped me understand for sure.
Yeah. So do you, now that you've kind of been putting all of this together all this time, do you think that you've had other experiences than the two that you remember?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's 1,000 pages of, there's some more stuff in there too. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
we're not gonna run. I mean, you can ask me anything. Lots of stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff has happened.
So for you personally, how do you feel about, that we call it different things now? He's always been abducted. Now it's like experiencer. How do you feel about that for you personally?
You know what? So there's people. It's funny that there's the field. There's like people who like are really adamant, never use the word abduction.
Yes.
And then it's a fine vocabulary word. The issue is like, you abduct someone, then the police can come and put you in jail for abducting someone. That's like, and so I'll just get into the murkier details. Like because they felt familiar doesn't mean what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like the word I like to use is direct contact. And honestly, the only reason I like that is because it sounds sort of cool, right? Wouldn't that be like a good name for like a,
yes,
Tom Cruise in direct contact.
Direct contact.
Coming this fall, So, I use the word direct contact. Some people will use experiencer. I use that all the time, the term experiencer. But then even that one, you have to kind of like, if someone's not up to speed, then you have to give them
they don't know what you're talking about.
That means. And Whitley Strieber used the visitor experience. We're all essentially saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And there's so much baggage associated with words that
absolutely.
But I got nothing against the word abduction. The only reason I don't use it is just because people kind of throw hissy fits sometimes.
There's certain connotations that get contributed to it. It's not necessarily that the word's bad, but the connotation of the word and the back, like you said, kind of the junk that it picks up over the years turns it into something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Mike, you didn't answer my question.
I'm good at that. Keep going. So I change the subject. Keep going. What was the question?
How do you feel about it? Like, how do you feel? Does it make you feel uneasy that you don't know what was happening, or do you feel calm about it, or like what's the emotions for you?
So from 2006 so here, let me back up. So I'm not shy about this at all, right? So I've had a history of clinical depression, and I've had to deal with that. So like the act of going through the therapy process and doing the hard work and self-examination, like that's like, I had done a lot of that leading up to all this. So when around the age of 30, 30 was rough. Around the age of, 44 there, I feel like I had a lot under my belt as far as self-examination and dealing with depression. What I can say right now is I've been completely depression-free for a decade. So that's
yay. That's wonderful.
2014 to now. Yeah, it's great. Well, it's great. And there's reasons for that, and I can go into that if you want and such. But but what I'm saying is like I know what it means to do the hard work and that kind of thing, and what an uphill battle that can be. So you asked, how does it feel? So I can say, this is something this is true. I'm as best as I can say this is true. Between the 2006 with the event with Kristen to around 2013, that's 7 years. I spent 95% of my waking hours wondering if I had gone insane.
Oh, wow.
So it was rough. It was rough. And I was writing on the blog at that point. I had this blog that I started in 2009, and wow, do I sound frazzled. Yeah. Like I was like processing this stuff. What happened after the event with Kristen, it felt like the dam burst. And I was in the valley and just just these synchronistic events just were flooding over me. I wrote a whole book on just the synchronistic events that were happening after, like in that chapter of my life, where it's not just that, but it was a rough chapter of my life. And then in 2013, I had what I call my confirmation event. I'm happy to talk about that too. And it was basically me, I've given this kind of talk to people in England, and I said, I just had to cry uncle. And you know what that means, right? Just
Yeah.
Yeah. The people in England don't know what that means.
We don't know what that
You
is.
had to cry uncle. And I was like, I had to explain, So basically I was like, enough. I give up. It's happening. It's true. It's real. I can't deny it anymore. Like I was fighting to deny what was real, heavy, improbable synchronicities were just like raining down on me. And I was just like, this can't be real. So, but there came a point when I was, this is really happening. So I'm much calmer about it now.
Yes.
I'm also at the receiving end of like sometimes 6 good owl stories a day.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes these are intertwined, not just with UFOs, but with other events. Here, I'm going to make a point here in a second. So I got these letters. The letters usually begin with something like this. I've never told my wife this story. I never told I can't tell my boss. I found you online. I'm going to tell you this story. And they tell me a story that I have heard 500 times in one form or another. Little nuance, a little different, but they're often very magical, right? So the stories you get from like the jet pilots that see tic-tac shaped polka dots flying in the skies over the ocean and they land on the aircraft carrier, they don't talk about the weird stuff or the mystical stuff. I suspect strongly they've got stories to tell, but they're not telling them. But the people who are telling their stories are so mystical and so mythic and so poetic. And so I can say to these people, I have not heard your story exactly, but I've heard many with the same flavor and mood. I can say, I'm not a clinician. I can't give psychological advice or therapeutic advice, but I can say, you are not alone. My files are bursting with stories just like yours. So you are not alone. And I've gotten to the point now where I think that these owl experiences have been with us since the dawn of time, since the dawn of mankind. I'm convinced we stepped out of the cave, had a powerful owl experience, shared it with the village. These myths arose. And we live in the Western world where we don't have we're told this can't happen, right? So if we lived in Ireland 400 years ago, or if we lived in South Dakota on a reservation right now, there's elders in the community that could say, these things happen. We're adrift as Westerners. We have great cars, we have great computers, but we don't have this mythic foundation. So, but the ancient stories, the folklore, the myths tell me that this has been part of the human condition since the dawn of man. And so what is happening is nothing new, but we don't have a way to address it in our day-to-day, Western materialistic framework. Oh, here I was going to tell. Can I just do a little thing here?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, good. So here 5 things. There's 5 things. I haven't told a single UFO story in this thing yet. A little bit. I've hinted at some things. So bright light in my yard. It wasn't. UFO means flying. That was in the yard, so that's not a UFO technically. So UFOs are definitely connected to the owl mystique. I say that just from the volume of stuff I've received and the direct conversations I've had with people and how much is in the literature. But it's not just the UFO event. It's also meditation. I got a lot of stories about people meditating and seeing owls. They'll close their eyes, they'll meditate, they'll open their eyes, and there'll be an owl right in front of them. Very, very common. The other one is psychedelics, most particularly mushrooms. People take psychedelics in a ritual setting, not as opposed to like, party on like high school in
Yeah.
the 70s kind of setting, but they'll take it in a ritual setting and they'll have owl experiences. It's not 100%. It's not like just because you take mushrooms you'll have an owl experience, but it's definitely a pattern in my studies. And then the third would be shamanic initiation. People going through the shamanic initiation process, it is well understood that they'll see owls. And it's really funny. Like people say, well, it's like I say, you talk to a shaman. This is well understood. And they say, like, who talks to shamans? And I'm like, you write a book about UFOs and owls, and guess what? You're going to talk to a lot of shamans that like start calling you up. So, and then the fourth one would be owl and death, and that's the richest vein, almost richer than the UFO thing. But the owls and death people. Now the myth, folklore is right in Shakespeare, and in Julius Caesar, and also in Macbeth. There's an owl, like someone does a sound effect in the theater, makes a hooting sound, and it's does the night bird shriek, and then one of the characters in the play will die. It's foreshadowing the death. This is all over the mythology. This is all over the folklore. I have found very, very few examples of this. What I'm finding is a much richer, much more pronounced pattern in the data, and really emotional, is that people will see an owl. Oftentimes an owl will arrive at their home after a parent dies. Very common. Very common. There's a few other outlying aspects, but and then they will go and talk to that owl as if it is their parent.
Oh wow.
This is very common, and their grieving will lessen. So here's a story. Guy goes, his father dies of a heart attack. He was right there when it happened. Father, boom, falls to the floor. He goes in the hospital, ambulance. They can't revive him. He's dead on arrival. He deals with all the stuff, all the hospital stuff that goes on. And it's late at night. He's really emotional and shattered. Walks out of the hospital. The mechanical doors open up for him. He steps onto the sidewalk in the middle of the night, totally quiet. There's an owl on the grass right next to the sidewalk. He goes up and says, "Dad, I love you. Thank you for being a great father. It's been an honor to be your son. I'm going to miss you terribly." That is common. That is not, people say, that was so weird. What a crazy experience. I'm like, no. That is normal in the human experience. And I say that because of the volume of letters just like that I've received. So we've got these 5 things. It's not just UFOs, meditation, mushrooms, or psychedelics. Shamanic initiation, and death. These 5 things. I would call it these highly charged human experiences. And all of them are kind of on the mystical side of things. Death, meditation, shamanic initiation, psychedelics, and UFO contact. These are all kind of elusive, hard to understand, mystical experiences. And these are what are connected to the owl. So I would argue that the owl is connected to the highly charged human experience, and not necessarily, it's too simplistic to say owls are connected to UFOs. The owl is connected to the highly charged human experience, of which UFO contact or UFO sighting is certainly a highly charged human event. So it's a much richer tapestry than just flying saucers and such.
Yeah.
That's, that's a really interesting, there's a lot of interesting things you said, and I think there's about 8 different directions I want to go with this.
I'm tough. I do that to people. Yeah.
but I'll choose one. And that's that, I didn't realize, like I had talked to you a little bit before about hearing the connection between UFOs, but the connection between, you brought up the shaman and kind of the spiritualism, the symbolism that takes place there is pretty interesting, because I myself ended up having a connection with owls right about the time that I started really kind of delving into reading runes and kind of doing some things with spiritualism. I guess you can consider some of that shamanistic. And I became completely obsessed with owls. My wallpaper was owls, and my emotes in my Twitch chat were owls, and I was having owl art done, and that specifically came from working with runes and starting to get into spirituality. And I can honestly say, if I would have like chosen an animal, I probably would have picked a grizzly bear or something like that, right? Like, that would have been the animal I would have picked. But for some reason, owls is what seemed to come to the forefront. And I can see in chat we had some others that we have a couple comments here that said the owl told me about my dad 8 hours before he died suddenly, is one comment we had here. And Priestess of Wonderland said an owl visited most of my family members when my dad died.
Very common. Very common. It's very common.
Yeah, so that's interesting because now we have a connection almost between these two things. And so almost like, so if there's a connection between shamanism and spiritualism and owls, then what's the connection between shamanism and spiritualism and UFOs? Because
there's a beautiful book. Yeah, there's a beautiful book called The Passport to the Cosmos, which I read very early on in all this. I read this before the event with Christian in the mountains, so I was kind of front loaded with these ideas to a degree. But Dr. Mack, who wrote the book Abduction and was he was the chair of the psychiatry department at Harvard Medical School. So like Pulitzer Prize winning author, no joke, the big cheese in the, but he wrote a book on where he compared and contrasted the UFO abduction experience with the shamanic initiation experience. He talks about owls it's right in his book. But again, it's like, it's a sentence here and a sentence there. It's minimal, but it's right there in his book. So the question, so what is happening when there's UFO contact? So I ask, the questions I ask people, I'm not like a normal UFO researcher. Here's the questions I ask people if they have a UFO story or a highly charged synchronicity or a highly charged owl sighting. I say, what was going on in your life leading up to the event? And then the next question is, what changed after? And then the next question is, how would you rate your psychic skills? And then I would ask, do you have any healing skills? And I used to ask, are you a creative type? And I stopped asking because everyone says, oh yeah, I'm an artist. Or, so I stopped asking that one. I don't need to ask that one anymore. So those are questions. So I would say a shaman would have highly charged psychic skills and would have healing abilities. So I'm not looking at the big totality of the UFO spectrum, right? That goes from government conspiracies to measuring burn marks in the farmer's field to there's all kinds of stuff. But I'm looking at this thin little sliver of owls and UFOs connected. So you pull on that thin little thread, right? You would expect it would be, I just expected I'll write a magazine length article and be done with this. That was
1,000 pages
4 books ago. And, so, well, it's more than 1,000 if you count the fiction book in there too. So
oh my goodness,
that's almost in a different category, but it's still the same. I'm wrestling with the same mystery. So someone sees a UFO close up and they then become psychic. This is normal. This is well understood in the lore. Nobody talks about it, but it's well understood. Some people talk about it to a degree. And then they often get healing abilities. So the shaman will often have what's called a shaman sickness, where they'll have a psychotic break almost as a child or as a young adult. Joseph Campbell wrote extensively on this in his books. And then they will be, the elders in the village, let's say, would see the child in the village that is going through the psychosis, let's say, if we were using modern terms, and that they would say, he's going to be the next shaman. You don't get to choose whether you're the shaman. You don't volunteer. I want to be the next shaman. How's that sound? Doesn't work that way. The village chooses you, and it's usually because of some psychotic break or some sort of break with reality that the child has. Now, this is if some buddy in Ohio at their junior high school said, I think I got abducted by the aliens. The teacher would say, you're having a psychotic experience. We're going to put you on psychopharmaceuticals. We're going to send you to the therapist. Does that child then become psychic and have healing abilities? In essence, is the UFO contact experience a shamanic initiation? You could argue that and make a pretty good case for that. Saying it so bluntly is maybe a little simplistic, but I would argue, yes, that shamanism and the UFO contact experience are connected. Now, let's take a half a step back. There are things like being a true shaman means something different in South Dakota than it does in Siberia, than it does in Africa, than it does in Ireland. But I mean, all these cultures have their medicine man, their shaman, the crone at the edge of the village that helps with problems and psychological problems, emotional problems, and I talk to people all the time who have UFO and owl experiences. I'm saying this, it's provocative. I would love to get the data. I would love to have some statisticians look at my files, which are thousands deep at this point. But I'm arguing that half the people who come to me that have UFO and owl experiences are Reiki healers. Half.
Wow.
And that's a wild statistic. Now, Reiki healing isn't technically shamanism. I would call it shaman-like. It's tinted with the tone of a shaman, like some doing Reiki healing. They're basically doing a magical, energetic healing on someone without touching them.
But most Reiki healers are into a lot of other types of things that go along those shamanic lines too, though.
Absolutely, and I know some Reiki healers that are like truck drivers, and they're not they're not like women in Sedona with like turquoise earrings and flowy linen dresses. But yeah, so I would argue strongly that there's a connection between owls and, I just did the thing, I mix up owls and UFOs all the time. Between UFO contact and shamanics and shamans.
Yeah. So interesting. I don't even know where to go with questions here because my brain is on fire.
Here, I'll tell the story. I'll tell a story. So I just drank some coffee. So if I get too talky, you just tell me.
Well, I'm joining you.
I get a letter.
I got my cup here too. So
a guy contacts me. He's from Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. He grew up on an Indian reservation in Michigan. And I had to look it up. I was like, I didn't even know there was an Indian reservation. There was a Huron reservation. I think I've got this right. And it doesn't look like much on the map. It looks like a neighborhood, essentially. And he was flying a kite as a 12-year-old boy. He's an adult now. But as a 12-year-old boy, he was flying a kite. And it was a kite he loved, which I think is an interesting detail. He loved this kite. And the big gust of wind comes. He's in a field, and the kite gets pulled away, and the ball of string gets pulled out of his hands, and the kite flies away, and the string flies into the woods, and he sees it go into the woods, and he gets his friend, come on, let's go and find the kite. So they go into the woods, and they look around, and they see the kite in the top of a tree. So they go to the base of the tree, and at the base of the tree is an owl all wrapped up in the string.
Oh no.
So it's like they get an adult, and they come back and they cut the string, and the owl's been injured. So they nurse this owl back to health, and they release it. And he told me the story. The question I ask will tell you, like, the kind of stories I've been hearing. He said, and I ask him, "Are you a shaman?" And he says, "Oh man, in a word, yes." And I'm not, it's private stuff, but I can say that his role as the shaman was not easy. It was really rough. And so that is also, like, people ask me, are owls good or bad? And I'm like, ooh, that's a tough one. Like, owls, collectively, what I can say, given all my accounts, owls represent a challenge, like a big challenge. Now, a big challenge doesn't mean it's bad. You can confront a challenge, work through it, and be better for it. So the challenge isn't necessarily bad. It can be hard work. So that would be my. So there's that's a story I can tell quickly. I got a lot of stories. Some of them take too long to tell, but that one's the one I can tell quickly.
We do have quite a few questions. Here's one from Luna Palema. She asked, talking about 6-foot owls, Cacao Canyon. Have you heard of loud? Oh my goodness, larger owls appearing. I'm trying to put larger and owls together in the same word there.
Yeah. So that Chaco Canyon is in New Mexico, and now this, I don't know the 6-foot owl stories, but there, this is okay. Now we're going to take a little so there's a people report 4-foot tall owls, very common. Mm-hmm. Now owls don't get to be 4 foot tall, like they simply don't. A big 3-foot tall owl is just about at the edge of what like any ornithologist would that, and the owl would have to stand on its little tippy toes to be 3 foot tall. So people are 4-foot tall owls, 5-foot tall owls. Yeah, they're talking about these big owls. Now there might be, I'm not sure if he's talking, there might be a pictograph of a 6-foot tall owl, or there might be an owl, spirit animal that is in the Chaco Canyon area that the Navajos, I think that's in the Navajo area in that part of New Mexico, that might get reported. I simply don't know, but that people seeing those large owls, impossibly large, like no owl on earth is that big. I hear those stories a lot, and what I get is people will, here's a real common story. Someone is driving down the road at night, they turn a corner, there's a 4-foot tall owl in the road. And they're like, well, that's a big owl. And they kind of like, they pass it, or the owl flies off, and then they get home, and it's like supposed to be midnight when they get home, it's 2 a.m. And something happened, and they'll go through hypnotic regression. Yeah, missing time. They'll go through hypnotic regression. And then the hypnotherapist will say, describe the owl you saw on the road. And they'll say, well, it's skinny, and it's got a bald head and big black eyes, and it's got a tight-fitting, shiny spacesuit on, and I don't think that's an owl. So the implication is that there's a like a gray being, the gray alien, the one of those, that's the prototypical being like we're used to seeing on the X-Files, would put a psychic image into the mind of the observer. Like they would put that in there. Now it's not just owls, it's also deer. Those deer, so you really, I've talked to a lot of people. The 2 things at the top of the list are deer and owls. And then underneath that is a whole bunch of other things: squirrels, raccoons, dead relatives. Jesus shows up a lot. Firemen, clowns. There's all these clowns that the clowns show up. That it's like, why do people have fear of clowns? Yeah. So these other things show up in that lore too. And
so that's referred to as like a screen memory, right?
Exactly,
like they're
a screen memory. Yeah,
image into your mind so that you think that it's something else. And sometimes it seems like it's to make the person more at ease. But then if it was a clown, I think that would make it worse.
It would. Yeah, a lot of stories like this doesn't make sense. People are like, oh, I woke up and there was a 4-foot tall squirrel at the base of my bed. So that's a little weird. It's not. Now I would argue. So deer and owls are at the top of the list. Deer and owl are both very highly mythic animals. They got a lot of totem energy. I would argue that they are choosing those animals because of their archetypal power. Like we can tap into our collective consciousness is we share a collective consciousness. I'm kind of a limp here. I'm saying this kind of like, I'm saying as if it is like a hard and fact truism, but it's something that feels right to me. We share a collective conscious aspect with all of humanity, and we have a preloaded definition or deeper knowledge or richer knowledge of what the spirit meaning of an owl would be and the spirit meaning of a deer, what that would be. So I would argue that these beings are choosing these animals not because an owl is something you might see on the road at night. Mm-hmm. That's a very Western materialistic supposition. But I would say on a more mystical way of looking at it would be that they are choosing these animals because they are an archetype. And we can tap into that archetypal power.
They mean something to us.
at a deeper, deep level. It's all very tricky to try to describe.
Yeah. Here's another question. If you may or may not know how you feel about this one. Is the owl related to father/divine masculine energy?
I would say no. I would say the owl is much more connected to the divine feminine energy. An owl is a night totem, right? So in mythology, Athena,
yeah,
or has an owl, and that would be I can't remember her name. Oh, Diana. No. So anyway, so yeah, Athena has an owl. Athena's father is Zeus. Zeus has an eagle, right? So Zeus stands on the mountaintop. He's bare-chested. He's like super ego-driven. He's full of vengeance and envy and rage and all these. And the eagle flies in the bright, clear sunshine. So that's like that's our superconscious. That's like our identity. Now the owl flies in the forest at night. It's hidden. It travels in the forest at night, and the keeper of the owl is the maiden, right? So the exact opposite. So in the night is represented by the moon, and the moon is much more feminine energy, and the sun is a much more masculine energy. So I would argue that the owl is very much a mythic representation of the female, and then the eagle. The eagle is certainly a highly charged totem animal, and it's got a lot of mythic power, but that would be much more of a representation of masculinity.
All right. Here's another one. This is a little bit of a story with it. How does one know if they have come into contact with cosmic beings? In reflecting, I used to have what I called day terrors when I was younger, but they weren't scary. It felt like time had slowed to a very slow pace, like I was watching slow-mo.
Well, that's a very deeply, it's hard for me to say like what someone else's experience may or may not be, but I can say that the disruption in time is something that shows up very much as part of the UFO contact experience. There's a story of a fellow who was having a lot of contact, and he got up. He was sitting on the couch watching TV. And he got up and he went to the refrigerator, opened the refrigerator, and he got a can of Coke. And he opened the can of Coke and went, you open the can and make noise. And he went back and sat on the couch. And then there was this whole thing that happened. He was taken from the house, and it happens it doesn't happen like in a way, it's not like they come and grab you and take you out like commandos would in an action movie. Like somehow you go through the walls, and it's very, very mystical, which doesn't get reported as often as it should, the mystical qualities here. So he comes back from this contact event, and he goes on the craft. They put him through this kind of school thing. They were kind of teaching him this stuff. And then he gets put back on the couch, and he's sitting there on the couch, and he hears something in the kitchen. He hears the refrigerator door open, and hears of a can of Coke. And then he sees himself walking out of the kitchen, and then he this himself comes and sits right down and mad into him. So it was like the thing that happened, what would have been hours before, just like had finished happening. So there's this really strange disruption time that takes place within these stories. Not all of them, but there's a kind of that.
Makes me wonder about my weird disruptions of time.
Yeah.
The Lunar Paloma said that she saw a broad daylight, 6 foot off the ground with a 12-foot wingspan flew across the road. So she has had an experience with one of those gigantic, maybe owls.
Yeah, so it's 12 foot across the road. So an owl can have a big wingspan, because what happens? So the owls, falcons fly really fast. That's how they hunt, really, really fast. And owls they fly actually very, very slow, because they're trying to be quiet in flight. Yes. They're actually flying through the forest at night, listening. As they fly, they are listening for mice on the ground in flight. As they fly silent. So an owl has really, really big, boxy wings. And I've talked to a lot of people who've seen owls, and I've seen owls up close. And you see like a cute owl in the yard, and then it opens its wings, and you're like, holy moly, those are big. Like the owl's wings are bigger than they should be, but 12 foot, that's almost the width of a highway from curb to curb. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
incredible.
Impossibly large. Yeah.
Yes.
But
yes.
I don't discount those reports because there's a very consistent pattern. What is happening, what does take place, what she did see, I can't answer that, but I can certainly say that it's part of a pattern. Oh, there's a cat.
Yeah, we got a kitty that came.
Oh, here, it's my cat too. I have my cat here.
I actually have a question, kind of going back a little bit. We're making some progress here, so I hate to bring us back, but when we're talking about the nature of abductions or contact, I feel like when this started, and going over the famous cases that a lot of people know about, Travis Walton and Whitley Strieber and people like that we were discussing earlier, I feel like there was a connotation or a feeling made then that these were bad experiences and bad things were happening, and overall most things dealing with contact were bad. However, I feel like that over time and recently has been changing, where I'm hearing, well, I kind of thought it was a bad experience, but now that I've had time to reflect on it over a long period of time, I don't think that it is anymore. And people who are having hypnotherapy done where they're saying, overall, this was a positive experience. How do you feel about that? And have you seen that shift also, or do you think it's just kind of a little bit of both?
I know I know exactly the shift you're talking about. So one thing I can say is, yeah, I know some people who hate the aliens. They're so mad at them.
Yeah.
And there's injuries in essence, especially like people go through trauma and have like a very human reaction to trauma, which is sociological or like psychologically debilitating at times. Like PTSD, and people will have unremembered, like they'll have missing time. They won't remember what happens, but they will start suffering from PTSD. So they're essentially suffering from an event they can't remember. What I can say is the experience is frightening, terrifying, and so people will have a terrifying experience and label it as bad. I'm going to be very simplistic. I'm going to make a point that some other people have made. And I, like when you take your pet to the vet is terrified, but the vet isn't bad, but it's a terrifying experience for the pet.
Yes.
That falls apart. That kind of falls apart. Bud Hopkins was a researcher. He died in 2011, but he was a researcher that did a lot of work with experiencers, and he ended up using hypnosis. I worked with Bud. I knew Bud pretty well. Very gentle guy, very thoughtful, very caring. He was rooting for the experiencer. He was, and I never met John Mack, who died in 2014, and he was the Harvard psychologist. Now he was like friends with the Dalai Lama. He was very, very spiritual. He meditated. He knew all about like, the history of Hindu deities. He was a very well learned man, and he was a psychiatrist. He had like 50 years of experience dealing with like helping people overcome mental or psychological challenges. So he would really work with the people. And I've asked some people who worked with John Mack, like, why are you having a different outcome than the people that worked with Bud Hopkins? These guys were friends. They were rivals, but they had a good working relationship, by my understanding. And what he said is that, like, John took me deeper and deeper and deeper and really made me work to process these experiences. And sometimes that happens organically, and sometimes it doesn't. But I can also say that this is really a maybe. I got to be careful what I say. Okay, I have a sense. I'll say it this way. I have a sense that the actual contact experience has evolved from the, let's say, the 70s and 80s to the present day. Now, the 70s was 50 years ago. So in that half a century, things have evolved, and that I feel that people are addressing the things differently. That may be like because I would almost say that's because of the internet, and they can share their stories, and these people are not isolated. And there was a fellow named Ray Hernandez that did a series of statistical tests run through. There was a retired statisticians at Harvard that helped him with these tests, and one of the questions was basically, is this good or bad? Is this malevolent or benevolent? And I can't remember the exact wording, and I can't remember the exact statistics. They asked the question like any statistician would, a number of different ways, but it essentially came out that 75% roughly said they were good experiences, 25% they were bad experiences. Now, that doesn't mean one wins. It's not like a vote where like one wins, but I would say that I have to be very careful because I do not want to like ignore or deny the experience of that 25%. If they say they're having bad experiences, not my thing. So if I trust them and I really feel for them, because I said it earlier on. I said I spent 7 years spending 95% of my waking hours wondering if I had gone insane. That was a bad chapter of my life. But I did so much processing there. I'm now in this place where I can walk a little calmer. I'm a little more agnostic about the source. And then the book, The Messengers, that first book, I did not expect to write. When you look, I got some dark stories, and I got to include them. I can't put them on the shelf and pretend those don't exist. But what I can say is that overall, there's a benevolent, that's not even the right word, hopeful. There's a hopeful side to the owl UFO experience. I'm not looking at the full totality. I'm looking at the thinnest little sliver. So I'm not looking at a big data pool. I mean, it's a big data pool, but it's not as big as everything else put together. So I very cautiously say that there is a hopeful aspect within these experiences. They can be terrifying, but at the same time, the people are doing well. I've had these experiences. Many of them are. Some of them are. I'm challenged all over the place with these things, but I'm much less. I don't feel like I'm a victim. Let me put it that way.
Okay, that's good. I feel the same way. It's like each person's experience is different, and each person's experience is valid. So if they feel like it was a terrible, horrible experience, that's their experience. So it shouldn't be discredited, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess the thing for me is just seeing that how that changed over time and on reflection, you know, of decade, you know, things that happened decades ago. I'm like, well, you know, I've kind of I've heard lots of stories now. Like I've heard, you know, I kind of think about that differently now. And I don't think I was looking at it the right way. And so I think there's been a shift there. So that's interesting to hear it from your perspective.
Let me also add, we are dealing with a true mystery. Like it's like, I don't like if someone says they got it figured out and they tell you what the answer is, like run the other way. Don't, because nobody's got the answer.
No, I don't think we got the answers to anything really.
Yeah. So
I say that all the time.
We're dealing with a genuine mystery too. So on top of all that,
I tell Jenny this all the time. I much prefer to talk to somebody who has questions and answers. You know, and like it's, you know, like you want some answers, but in a lot of these fields, I don't think we've gotten to a point where we can know everything yet. And a lot of times an answer leads to more questions.
That's usually what happens.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's for sure. So I just want to note real quick, we are heading towards the bottom of the 9 o'clock hour. So we're getting there. So to kind of reset this, our guest tonight is Mike Clelland. We're talking about owls. We're talking about UFOs. We're talking about contact. And we're talking about synchronicities. And we have we have linked on the Twitch chat. If you're hanging out with us on Twitch, the links to all the places you can find Mike are there. And if you're watching this later on YouTube or listening to us on wherever you listen to your podcast, all of that information will be listed below under the content, so you can check that down in the section below the video there. And if you're trying to find Mike and want to go check that stuff out, we had a lot of questions earlier, and I'm not 100% sure that we got to all of them. So if you did have a question and we missed it, make sure to throw it back in chat. We will, because if you have them, we will run through another round of questions before we get to the 10 o'clock hour.
Yes, I tried to try to keep track of all the questions, but we could have missed some.
Yeah, we had a lot.
I can over answer a question. You can cut me off.
So I wanted to go back to what you were talking about with when you were talking about the 5 things, and you were saying that you feel from your collecting of all of these, in all this information, all these stories, that the owls are connected to essentially a profound moment for the person. I'm not saying the exact words that you said, but
highly charged human experience.
Highly charged human experience, yes. So going into that a little bit deeper, do you feel like, just talking about the actual physical animal of an owl, not like the screen memory ET stuff, do you think that the owls are perhaps energetically or psychically picking up on that experience and coming to check it out, or is it happening vice versa? Like, what do you think the mechanics are of that, even though we don't really know?
Wow, that's rough. Like, what's the mechanics of a dream? Like, how does that happen, right? So I mean, how, on one sense you can say, my dad's spirit entered the owl and then flew to my window and talked to my dad through the window. Or maybe your dad's spirit, the father's spirit, directed the owl to the window, or just the beautiful, mystical, magical nature of the universe set these events into place because these magical events happen, and then what's the source and how they happen, I don't know. I mean, I have certainly speculated that in the first part of the Messengers, I go through that speculation process where, so if you wanted an animal, so let's say this. So the owl has incredibly highly attuned vision at night and hearing. So does the UFO, which by all accounts, sometimes people say it hums, people say it's absolutely silent, it makes no noise at all. It's eerie is what people say. They say when the flying saucer was in the backyard, all noise stopped. There was no crickets, there was no leaves rustling, you couldn't hear the traffic on the road, all noise stopped. So it's not just that the craft was silent, everything was silent. So can the owl somehow, with no animal, I think I've got this correct, owls have, of animals with vertebrate animals, owls have the best night vision and the best hearing. So they have hearing and sight that we would define as magic. So could they sense presence of a UFO? Here's like one that's, could they sense a cosmic doorway opening up between the living and the dead? Right? Could they sense the beta and alpha waves changing as a person meditates? Right? I mean, this is total speculation on my part.
Well, yeah. Well, that's what I wanted to talk about, the speculation of what's going on.
What is good? So I feel like I kind of get ground to a halt when I say that, but I can say, well, let me think of the story. Like when you tell the story, so I can tell that story with the boy and the kite and the string. Wow, that touches me on a level. Here, I'll tell you one more story. This is another meditation story. Guy's meditating in his backyard. His family has an apple orchard. He's in the backyard. He's meditating, and his eyes are closed. and there's a squawk, squawk, squawk in the forest, shrieking, awful shrieking. His hair on his back of his neck stands up, and he's like, I gotta get out of here. This is scary. And he's like, no, I'm gonna face this. So he walks, the orchard is right next to the forest. He walks into the forest. He looks around, there's this owl on a branch right at eye level, and he walks up to it, and this thing is like squawk, 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 looking at him like it is angry. He said, this thing was chewing me out. It was loud. The barred owl, they are very loud, and it flies off, and he goes back to the house, and he tells his wife, like, oh my gosh, I like saw this owl, and it was looking right at me, and it was squawk, squawk, mad at me. This thing was yelling at me, it was chewing me out. And then the lady, his wife goes, that's nice, honey. Can you set the table for dinner? Oh, she doesn't get it. So he sits down at dinner, and the kids at dinner, and he's like, kids, this is what happened. I was in the forest, and this owl squawk, looking right at me, and it was so mad at me, and I didn't know what I did. And the kids are like, Dad. And they didn't, he said, they don't believe me. So he got his camera, he walked into the woods, and he said, my family doesn't believe me, I need a picture. And this owl lands on a branch, click, gets a picture, the owl flies off. And I said, what were you meditating on? What were your intentions? He said, oh, I remember what I was meditating. I was meditating either as a god.
It's
So
like
he says,
the
is there a
same
God? And this
thing,
thing is
though.
like, yeah. So it's that's very, I got a lot of stories where God shows up. Now it could be other things too, other highly important things like, so, but that was, I
That was
love
very
that. So
similar
how does
to
that,
Kristen's
so
story.
like totally right down the line similar. Yeah.
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 So,
Wow.
but
And then you
Like,
have the two different
what's-
aspects of it.
oh,
I was just going to say, because there's the two different aspects where, on one hand, the owl is representing something like the owl itself, the creature, the owl. But then we also have these situations that you were talking about before where people have the owl image in their mind, but when they're put under, hypnosis, they're seeing grays. So,
Yeah.
because, that would have to be like two different things that are happening, or we're just not able to comprehend exactly how those two things are connected. I don't know.
So when in the book, I went like, after you've heard the screen memory, after you've heard the 4-foot tall owl in the road story 500 times, you kind of get it. And I'm finding I'm more interested in the real owls. Here, I'll tell you a screen memory story. Do you know who Dolores Cannon was? She died a few years ago.
Yes, we are familiar.
She's put out some very popular books, and she did a form of hypnosis that would where people would sort of channel from these other identities. Really, she's written a lot of books that are great.
Yeah,
Some of them
the
are great.
QHHT.
So pardon?
QHHT.
Yes, exactly. That's the
Yeah,
hypnotherapy technique she uses. Or
Yeah.
Now she has her daughters are still working and putting forth her mission. Now, Dolores Cannon in the early 80s, I think I've got this right, was working as a family therapist, doing hypnotherapy. She was a hypnotherapist. She was doing things about like quitting smoking and relieving stress and sleeping. And so she was doing these very normal things. But this stuff would emerge. This weird UFO stuff would sort of come out of people's mouths when they were under hypnosis. And it kind of was a pattern. She talked to other therapists. So she met every month with the pool of therapists at her office. And she said to him that night, this UFO thing is coming up. I have to decide if I'm going to follow this or not. So she drives home from the meeting. It's nighttime. And she turns a corner in the road. She lives in Arkansas. And there's Joe Cunningham has read almost all her books. So, and I have, so she's driving home, and there's a 4-foot tall owl. And this is in the book called The Custodians. She writes about this in great detail. I had to footnote this she 4-foot tall owl on the road. She drives up. She drives a big truck. The owl's looking over the hood of the truck. She's parked right from. Let me tell you, like, you get the biggest owl in the world in the smallest truck. It's not going to be able to look over the hood. So it flies down the road, and it lands again. She pulls up to it. It flies down the road. It lands again. She pulls up to it. And it happens a bunch of times. And then it waits at their driveway, and she turns into her driveway. She tells her son, "Oh, I saw this big 4-foot tall owl." And her son's like, "Mom, there's no such thing." And then she's like, "Oh, you're right. There is no such thing. How it happened?" So the questions I ask: what was going on in your life leading up to the event? Leading up to that event, she said, I had to decide if I was going to look into the UFO thing. What happened after the event? Well, there's like 12 big fat books that tell exactly what happened after that event. So what happened? If that's a screen memory, that's not that is like, if I was shaman in a teepee in South Dakota, and some young brave said I was had to make a decision, and I saw a 4-foot tall owl. What message can you help me with? I'm not sure what I would say, but someone in the tribe would have a lineage of folklore that they could share with that young person or that member of the tribe to help them through what would be a spiritual issue or an issue of faith like that.
Yeah. Like I don't know, the correlation between UFO contacts, ET contacts, the owl thing, and I'm sure there's so many other types of things as well that just seem to set people in motion to do these mystical, shamanistic, spiritual things. It's just really amazing and unbelievable.
Yeah.
Have you, Jenny, had any kind of owl imagery come through with any of your ET channeling?
No. And I'm trying to think of all my owl experiences. And to be honest, I think I only have one. I only have one owl experience of one flying in front of the car. And it's like we just barely missed it. I don't know how we didn't hit it.
And what were you talking about?
Pretty large. I don't know. Were you in the car with that day, Frosty? We were driving back from Culpeper to Orange down that back road. I don't know. I think
probably not.
Yeah, I have no idea what we were talking about.
But I was certainly flying in front of owl. Yeah, I want to know too. Yeah, you're channeling aliens, and what I want to know. Yeah. So let me ask you a question. I don't know. So are you channeling? It says medium, but you're channeling. Yes. And what's the source of your channel? What are your guides, or what do you call them?
There is so many different things that happen to me. I was just trying to be an evidential medium and trying just to talk to people's grandmas, and then somehow along the way we end up with spirit guides, past lives, ETs, angels, ancestors. It just keeps growing and growing and growing, like the amount of things that come through for people in readings. So I don't even know where to start with my own stuff. It'd be a whole nother 2-hour conversation.
Well, that would be, I might have to follow up on this, because this is exactly what I'm looking to. The Joe Cunningham, I think his name was Joe Cunningham, just said, okay, well, just what we're talking about. He kind of said it in one sentence. There you go. Yeah. I have a shamanic power animal that is a snowy owl and an ET that helps me with my trance healing work. Well, that's that checks off every box in the whole list there.
Me and
that's
Joe have
not uncommon.
Learned trance together. Joe's my trance buddy.
Oh, okay. I went through a hypnosis session. I don't know how much time we have. So I went through a hypnosis session. I channeled, I think. I'm not sure. You want to hear what I said?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
I knew you'd say yes. So, so I went through this. It's too much to talk about what happened under the hypnosis session. But I was looking. Remember, I said the night of. I said, "Oh, my it all ended the night I had my confirmation event in March of 2013." So we were looking into that night with a hypnotherapist. Her name is Yvonne Smith, and she's very well known in the UFO research community. So I went there and we looked into that one night. I had no fear associated with that one night. And so this is the synchronicity thing. So this is going back to 2018. My book came out in 2015. I had met Yvonne at conferences. I called her up and I said, "Hey, I'd like to make an appointment for sometime in August." This was in June or something. And she said, "Mike, it's so nice to hear from you. I started your book, The Messengers, this morning."
What?
These kinds of things are baked into these stories.
Yes.
And so I go to her office and we look into that one night. I was in California I was giving a talk on something totally different, on camping actually, but I'm at her office and I say, "When I'm under, ask me what's up with the owls." She says, "Of course." So we go through this thing. It's like wild what emerged. I don't believe it. I don't believe it seems like I was presented with a fantastic story. I don't think the story is true, but the story has all these lessons in it. But I was like super emotional and just, and then afterwards, we're winding down a little bit. And she says, and Mike, what is your connection to owls? And without skipping a beat, I say, the owls aren't important. Right? So I'm the owl guy. I'm already well known as the owl guy. I'm like owls all day long. So all I do is full-time answer owl letters, write owl books. Like owls are the most important thing. So the first thing out of my mouth is the owls aren't important. And when people are under hypnosis, like they talk really slow and they talk in long pauses. And I didn't sound like that at all. I said, the owls aren't important. I am an artist. And I know how people take in a symbol and how they need a symbol. But the owls aren't important. The owl is a symbol on a door. The owl is the correct symbol for the door, but the owl is not important. The door is important. We are on this side of the door in a tight, claustrophobic little hallway. And on the other side of the door is an infinite vastness. And that's all I got.
Makes
makes
sense to me.
Yeah.
Oh, it allowed me so much freedom. I felt like I was stuck and trapped in this owl thing. I feel like it just loosened up all those shackles. And I still am fascinated by the owl stories, but I'm not clinging to them in the way I was until that whatever 5 sentences emerged from my mouth. I never would have said that if given my own devices.
Because like what you were saying earlier about the experiences and then how it leads to all these other things, like it's just all of those experiences for people are so that they start questioning. It's opening the door to the vastness of the universe so that you can start to question and try to understand for yourself what all of this is about. And that's beautiful. Keisha said it. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well,
so
I was going to say
I was
kind of interesting because what we get there too is trying to determine what the meaning of the owl is. If the owl is being used as a symbol, then that also kind of clarifies exactly what the purpose of it is. It's what the owls have symbolized through human history, which are the things we talked about before: wisdom, all these the connections to different mythologies and stuff that they've had. So you don't really have to search for some kind of new meaning for what the owls are representing. Or at least that's the way I would take that. Yeah.
The owl flies through the forest at night in what we would call complete darkness, right? So we can say, oh, the owl has highly developed evolutionarily, has eyes that can pick up on very, very minimal light and has ears that can hear certain frequencies that we can't. And so we can say that as a Westerners, materialist, but ancient man would have just said it's magic. The owls fly at night through the forest. They fly with complete ease through the branches, through the forest, and hunt at night in complete darkness. That would have been magic for ancient man. And that in the ancient lore, I'm simplifying this somewhat, but this is the consistent thread that runs through these stories. The owl is a messenger, not in the bright daylight realms of ego and vanity and masculine issues. I'm simplifying this greatly, but in this forest of darkness, of testing, so the owl would fly to that other realm in the darkness, the land of our ancestors, the land of the spirits, the land of the gods, and then return with a message. And that is the myth of the owl. Now, that's ancient history. Present day, we have Harry Potter, who has an owl that delivers the mail.
He's also the messenger,
The messenger. It delivers the mail. It couldn't. So our present day mythology in the form that's like our present day mythology. Harry Potter. That's fair to say, has an owl that delivers the mail. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. It's ancient lore alive right now in real time.
Yeah, the description of the owl flying through the forest at night in complete darkness. It's all the unknowns. The owl is flying through all the unknowns to bring us to the door so that we can open it into our own unknowns and figure things out.
And that door
seems
is
like that's
infinite,
what's happening.
There's an infinite vastness, like that beyond that door is infinite.
Yep.
Yeah.
And everybody's experiences are going to be different.
Wow.
So someone asked me at a UFO conference, this was early on, and that was when I was a mess. That was when I was that person who was like spinning and thought I was going insane. And I was going to these UFO conferences mostly just so I could be around people that I talk unfiltered with. Someone said, how's your life different now since you're looking into these experiences? And I had to think. And I said, I now live in a magical universe, which I would not have been able to say just a few years before. And I really believe that. And let's talk about a blessing. It's a blessing and a curse in some ways, but it's a blessing in so many ways where the world around me is rich in ways that were totally new to me then, and I feel much more comfortable swimming in these waters now. But it's a rich, magical experience. And I feel absolutely honored, and I feel a strong sense of responsibility that these stories that I'm receiving don't just get put in a file cabinet and locked away. I want this to be alive and to be shared and to be part of a growing and new mythology that's happening all around us. But like just your show is a very simple example of this could not have existed 10 years ago. Maybe 10 years ago, it just was on the verge of being able to. But these shows, people having these conversations, these weren't normal conversations a decade ago. They're normal now.
Yeah.
Oh, we talk about that all the time. I mean, even now, when we were talking earlier about, people who have had these experiences and people who have had contact and things like that. And you were talking about your own experience and that it was difficult to be able to try to talk about that in public. And I can only imagine, because I've had some experiences. I haven't had anything like that that I know of. But just because these are the things that I like to talk about, that can be difficult. That can be difficult to talk about in a public setting. All the topics that we talk about on the show, anything with the paranormal, supernatural, there's a stigma to it, and I think because we have platforms like this, so many platforms, that hopefully that stigma is starting to be removed. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah,
it's not going to zero. It may never go to zero,
no.
but it's definitely changed. The needle has changed enormously in the last 20 years. I mean, Whitley Strieber got vilified publicly, demonized in ways that I haven't. I've been totally open with my experience. I got essentially no pushback. Maybe someone behind my back says something, but essentially zero pushback.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. Yeah. Yeah, and I know that was really difficult, and for the people who came out early on with these things, that had to be just unimaginable. The pushback that they had to deal with, compared to a community they can find easily now. Like you were talking about going to UFO conventions and stuff like that, and now you can jump on YouTube and check out the Witching Hours, or go over to all of the different message boards and podcasts, and have a community that you can talk to, which is really important for those things. Keisha said 111 minutes in, and we are the new normal.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Before we run out of time, you have mentioned a couple of times a confirmation night, and I wanted to know what you're talking about. What are you talking about?
Oh my word, this is a tough one to sum up in a little thing. It's about the last 40 pages of one book, and I had to tell it twice. And one book is sort of a memoir, and then the other book is The Messengers. And it's like, people said, why'd you tell that twice? It's like, well, if you read it, like I really told it much more thoroughly the second time in the other book. And it's so on the night of Sunday night, March 10th, 2013, I was driving home from a UFO conference, and I did a lot of backpacking, camping and stuff. So I was really comfortable sleeping on the side of the road. Out west, it's really normal. You just pull off the side of the road and sleep in the back of a truck. I had a little Subaru, so I just drove around with a pad and a sleeping bag and a pillow, and it was cold. It was winter. I mean, winter for the desert, but it was like cold. So I had a big, thick sleeping bag and a big pad and a big pillow. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I looked up at this hilltop, and I looked at this thing on this hilltop and I said, that looks just like a landed flying saucer.
Ooh.
And I was like already doing the blog. I was at a podcast at that point, and I was like talking about owls and UFOs all the time. And I was like, if that was a UFO, I would know it, right? I would have some sort of psychic feeling, like it would like give off UFO vibes, and I would pick up on that. So I looked at this thing and I was like, come on, whatever, like, do I feel anything? None, zero. I'm like, oh, some round building. So I rolled over and went to sleep. I woke up later and there was a coyote howling near my head. And I've slept out a lot. And I worked for 25 years as an outdoor educator teaching in the mountains. And I've heard a lot of coyotes. I've slept out with that a lot. I've never, ever, ever had a coyote that close.
Yeah.
It was so loud. I sat up. I couldn't see it. Should have been like right there. I mean, I couldn't see it. The coyotes in the desert are really small. They're tiny. And so I'm like, oh, like it was really magical. I remember feeling blessed to hear this sound. Now, I woke up and I looked up, and the round structure, round building was still on the hill. And then I did it a third time. I woke up a third time and there was a bright light behind a bush. Oh, and when I did the hypnosis session with Yvonne, that was what I said. It was a bright light behind the bush. And then all of a sudden I'm going, it's them. It's them. I know it's them. I was describing the bright light behind the bush. And then I'm on board the craft. Like,
wow.
That's what happened in the hypnosis session. Again, I'm going to say, I'm cautious. The story that emerged there, we don't have time to tell, but it's like really heavy. And I don't believe it, but it's a beautiful story. It's got a lot of powerful symbolic meaning. Now, the coyote's a archetype, especially of the landscape of southern Utah, the Native Americans there. It's a trickster archetype. And so I get home the next day and I look up on Google Maps to see if there's anything built there. It's like, what is that round structure? Was there something, someone built a house there? Did someone have a water tank there? Is there like some sort of like cell tower repeater that's in the shape of a round building? So there's nothing on the hill. I've been back to that spot many times. There's nothing there. I looked on the map. I'm very, very skilled with maps. I knew exactly where I was sleeping. I knew just the shape of that hill, and there should have been, and I knew just where it was. And so there's nothing on that hill. I've been back many times to that spot. There's nothing on that hill. And it was 2.6 miles away from where I was sleeping. So whatever it was, big.
Wow.
And I mean, in the desert, especially at night, the clarity of the air is, but anyway, still, it must have been big. Now, I write about it. I read a blog post about it. I'm like, I had this experience. I was under the stars. I put the GPS coordinates right in the blog post. I'm like, I called up MUFON and asked if anyone had reported anything. And then it was actually the next day, I'm standing by my desk and I go, and there's like this psychic moment of just like instantaneous full knowing. I know how weird this must sound, but it seems so normal to me now. That's like
not weird to us, Mike. Not weird to us.
But when I tell to my sister, I get a different reaction than you're sharing here. So, but so I get this complete psychic knowing, and I see a map of southern Utah, and I know the event that was on. It's a map of southern Utah with 3 dots on a map. Boom, 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 and they're in a nice straight line. And I'm like, okay, well, I know this spot here was what happened the night before. Well, it actually would have been 2 nights before because I had been home for a whole day. It was actually the 12th so it was the 10th when I had the experience under the stars, the 11th when I did all the data and drew the drawings, and the 12th, the next day, I was like, boom, I had this psychic experience of like seeing this map. So I make maps. I sit down at my computer and I look up the map, and I said, well, what are those other 2 points? Now I had 2 other experiences that sound just like UFO abduction events. And I knew just where they were, got the GPS coordinates. I'm kind of weird like that. Like I knew just where those points were, and these lined up exactly in a straight line.
Wow.
Like, and each of the other two stories are pretty good too. I'm looking at the clock here. We might not get to them. And so what happened was, it wasn't the night under the stars. It wasn't seeing the aliens out the window when I was 30. It wasn't the missing time as a little kid. It wasn't like the owls in the mountains with Kristen. It was seeing this line on the map that lined up these 3 separate events. Each event sure felt like a UFO abduction event. And those 3, and I was like, there's no way this happened randomly. This was staged. This was orchestrated. Now, I love making maps. I love sleeping out into the stars. I love things like coyotes and like that kind of spirit totem animal. I mean, I love this stuff. And so it felt like these details were presented to me so I would play detective, and using the unique skills that I possess. Like, I know how to make a map on these map programs. And I made a straight line on the landscape, and they all lined up. And I was just like, I give up. It's happened. It's real. What happened was, here's what happened. There was a tape loop in my head that had been running continuously for 7 years that said, this can't be true. This cannot be true. This can't happen. It can't involve you. This can't be true. This can't happen. It can't involve you. That had been running continuously. That tape got pulled out of my brain, thrown away. That voice was gone. My life was still, I had issues. I had stuff to deal with. It was not easy, but wow, was it a lot easier without that continual tape loop. Like, just where the groove was just stuck in that track. And now here's a weird thing. I started writing the book, The Messengers, that day.
Wow.
The same day I had the confirmation event. This big fat book that has defined my life I started writing it that day, that same day. I didn't realize that until like 6 years later. Like, wait a minute, that day? Because I have the notes. I have like the documents with dates on them. I was like, that was that day.
Oh my goodness. There's no coincidences.
And it's also just, I don't know, that's so prolific and powerful too, because for me, the message that kind of popped out of that for me too is like understanding our own importance, that you are part of the story. I think, because sometimes I feel like, you might just people can feel like they're just like a cog, but to me, almost spiritually, it's an important message that we're all are important, and we have to understand that and acknowledge that we have a role to play, and that there's things that we're, I don't know, meant to do, possibly. So I kind of felt that running underneath there. I don't know if it was that way for you, but yeah.
Oh, in
Great
retrospect, it's like someone else wrote a script, and I was reciting the lines. I was performing the stage direction without realizing that I had somehow memorized the script from some other cosmic existence. Let me back. That is how it feels. That doesn't make it true, but that is how it feels.
Yeah. So I got one more question for you, which probably is more than 3 minutes, but so you went through all that time with that terrible tape in your head telling you this isn't true. You got rid of it. You embraced it. You've written all these books, but then you go through this hypnosis session where you have this memory, this story that comes out of your ET experience, but you feel like that isn't true. Why do you feel like that one isn't true?
Because it's so fun weird. That's why it's not true. So basically, we don't have time to go into it, but I summed it up pretty nicely there. It's weird to be believed, right? It's too strange, but it's strange in this kind of like, it's a good story. I apologize. I wouldn't. It's not going to do any good for me to try to tell it in 2 minutes. But
maybe you can come back and tell us.
Oh, I'll happily come back and tell that story. So
excellent. That would be great. And we've hit the 9. we're hitting
Yeah,
up
we're
on 10
almost
o'clock
done.
here.
Yeah.
So what we'll do, I want to mention real quick. You can check Mike Clelland out at MikeClelland.com. That's CLELLAND.com. You can check him out at hiddenexperience.blogspot.com and messengersthebooks.com. I wanted to ask you real quick, Mike. We have some pretty avid readers here in our Team Weird community. Where should they start? Do we start with the first book? Can you jump in with the last book? How do we
You could
go
jump
here?
into any of them anywhere. I bet you if you're watching this show, you'll come up to speed. This is I usually tell people to start with this book as far as the nonfiction books, and I'm gonna do a little. This is like I got to eat, right? So, this is I wrote a novel. Remember I said that you'd stack the 3 books. It's 1,000 pages, right? So this book is called The Unseen. It's a novel. It just came out like almost a year ago to the day. Just a year. It's been about a year and a week. This book has been out. It's selling pretty well. Read the reviews on Amazon. I'm like shocked at how glowing those are. So
That's wonderful.
I have 1,000 pages on UFOs and owls, nonfiction. People say you can write another book, and I'm like, good grief! If I can't make my point in 1,000 pages, not going anyone any good for me to write another big fat book, and basically just be the same story. And then they say, well, do you have enough stories for another book? And I'm like, I have enough story for 50 books, but it'd just be the same story over and over again.
Yeah.
So I kind of squeezed and turned it into like all these owl stories. I kind of turned into a fictional narrative, and that's that story. And people have been resonating very strongly with it. It's a very mythic book. It's got a very undertone of it is of a ancient myth made real. Oop! I just looked at the clock. So
we're good.
Thanks
fine.
But that's the fiction book, The Unseen. So you could start with The Unseen, or you could start with any of them. Yeah, but the Messengers or The Unseen.
Messengers is in my Amazon wish list.
There we go.
I want them all, but I'll get one at a time.
All right, we're going to hang out with chat for a minute more. But for everyone else who is listening later on the podcast and another time somewhere else, thank you so much for checking out the show. Please like, subscribe, leave a review, all those wonderful things to help more people find and listen to these wonderful guests that we have on weekly here. Thank you, everyone, so much, and thank you, Mike, for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. And
it's been my honor.
For everyone listening on the podcast, we will see you all next time. And for everyone else who is hanging out here with us in chat, we are going to go raid because we forgot to do it last week. Thank you, everybody, for your questions.
The last 2 times.
Well, we're using the new program. So thanks, everybody, for all the questions tonight. We appreciate you all so much, so much. CMC said thank you. Amber said thank you. Keisha's planning stuff for the future. I have big dreams. There we go. Yep. We are Team Weird. That's for sure.
Yeah, seriously, Mike, you could tell us any story and we'd just be like, oh yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't get any more. I don't think we can get any more weird.
No, we got some weird stuff that happens. So yeah. I see Muso Patty Savage is on doing tarot, and Black Sheep Meat is playing Baldur's Gate.
Mm-hmm.
There's others.
Right. Let's maybe we'll go visit Black Sheep Meat. It's been a minute since we went out of all of our different streams over there. Thanks again, everyone. Real quick before we go, coming up for next week, we have 2 shows. So we're going to be coming at you with double the trouble next week.
That's next week.
Yeah.
Oh, I better put that in my phone so I don't forget.
We're going to have Allie Cardinale on to talk about witch doctors and more on Tuesday, and then Michelle Ferguson is going to be on Thursday, and we're going to talk about the Akashic Records specifically there. And much more with her. So 2 shows on coming at you next week, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday. And so we'll see you all. We'll see you all then. Let me get the raid in here. Black Sheep Meat. We'll go say hi to Sheepy. All right, everybody, jump in there. Go throw up some wiggly Team Weird signs, and this is weird stuff. Thank you for coming. Thanks for hanging out, and we definitely got a little weird tonight. So take care, and we'll see you all later. Bye.
Bye now.
All right, we are